Good afternoon and welcome to the 2020 Political Forum hosted by the National Alumni Association of Spelman College Atlanta Chapter. I'm Adrienne Lance Lucas, president of the Atlanta Chapter, and we are happy that you chose to join us today. We are in for an exciting event, and we're going to start off with our moderator. Christine White is our moderator today. She currently she was a former prosecutor in Fulton County, Georgia, and she currently serves as the director of the Georgia Alliance for Progress. Christine is a proud Spelman alumna, and most of you have seen her on Georgia Public Television on Take a Seat at the Table. Christine, please introduce our panelists.
Hello, thank you, Madam President Lance Lucas. My name is Christine White, class of 2000. Welcome to the NAASC Atlanta Chapter Political Forum. We are here to demystify civic engagement, to learn more about the political process, and to share ways we can all contribute to finding solutions that face us as women, as Spelman and HBCU family, and as Black people in America. So first, a little disclaimer. We have to be clear that the thoughts and the opinions of the panelists do not represent or reflect the position of the National Alumni Association of Spelman. All NAASC platforms are nonpartisan, and comments shared here are solely for the purpose of information of our membership and the greater community. As a 501c3 organization, the NAASC does not endorse candidates for political office. So now that we are clear, this is a nonpartisan conversation. Please allow me to introduce our amazing panelists of thinkers and doers. Today on our panel, we have Dr. Eddie Glaude Jr. Dr. Glaude is the chair of the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University. Known to be a convener of conversations and debates, Glaude takes care to engage fellow citizens of all ages and backgrounds, from young activists to fellow academics, journalists and commentators, and followers on Twitter in dialogue about the course of this nation. Some like to describe Dr. Glaude as the quintessential Morehouse man, having left his home of Moss Point, Mississippi at 16 years of age to begin his studies. Many of our Spelman sisters may remember Dr. Glaude as the inaugural line for the African fraternity Kemet. He is also a columnist for the Times Magazine, regularly provides commentary on radio and television news, programs like Democracy Now!, Morning Joe, and The 11th Hour. We would like to welcome Dr. Glaude. Yay! We also have Val Demings, who represents Florida's 10th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. Today, she works on the House Judiciary Homeland Security, and Intelligence Committees. In 2020, she became one of the first women and one of the first African Americans to prosecute a presidential impeachment before the US Senate. In 2007, Val Demings made history when she was appointed to serve as Orlando's first female chief of police. When Chief Demings took office, she made the concept of protect and serve a tangible presence in Orlando's most dangerous neighborhoods, reducing violent crime by 40%. Demings is a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, vice chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, and a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, Inc. I apologize. Welcome, Congresswoman Demings. We also have Nikema Williams. She is a member of the Georgia State Senate for the 39th District. She's also chair of the Democratic Party of Georgia. In July 2020, Williams became the Democratic nominee for the Georgia's 5th Congressional District, selected to replace Congressman John Lewis on the November ballot after his untimely passing. She served as the vice chair for public policy at Planned Parenthood Southeast and a fellow HBCU graduate at Talladega College and a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I'm encouraging all of you to clap. Cynthia Wallace is a candidate in North Carolina's 9th Congressional District. The granddaughter of farmers, Cynthia grew up in Springfield, Georgia, a small town with a rural route address, no street address. As a Spelman woman, she set out to change the world by furthering her education, receiving a master's degree in statistics at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville, Florida. Cynthia helped to recharter the Charlotte chapter of the NAASC and served as president. Cynthia is an active member of the National Alumni Association of Spelman Jacksonville chapter. Cynthia's expertise in risk management and regulations have propelled her to a 25-year career in the financial services industry. And she's worked for 3 Fortune 500 financial service companies. Please welcome our Spelman sister, Cynthia Wallace. Thank you to all of our panelists. But before we get started, get into these good questions that you guys have sent in, we have a message from the esteemed senator from New Jersey, the Honorable Cory Booker.
It is United States Senator Cory Booker, and I am honored to get a few moments with you before you start this extraordinary political forum with some of the people that I look up to, admire, and have learned from. I want to thank Spelman College, one of our great HBCUs, one of our great colleges in this country. It is truly a place that graduates world changers, servants, leaders of light and hope and promise. Today's conversation will be wonderful. I am very much sourced by the panelists that you all have in my own work in the United States Senate. They are evidence of what we need to be doing. Each one of their commitment, conviction, their grit and their guts as they try to push and work to lead our nation to better days. I'm honored by the panel, I'm honored by Spelman, and I wish everyone the best. We are in the midst of a moment of crisis, but we also are in a moment of possibility. Thank you all for being committed to making our tomorrows better than our yesterdays and honoring the heroes of our yesterdays so that the children yet unborn will be able to enjoy a country that is closer to our ideals of justice for all. Thank you.
Well, that's just excellent. Thank you, Senator Booker. So we have some amazing questions from folks in our Spelman community. Panelists, thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to share your thoughts with us and our community here at Spelman. Please do your best to keep your responses concise to about a minute or less so we can get through as many of the questions as possible. Congresswoman Val Demings, I understand that your time with us may be a little limited, so is it okay if we start with you?
Yes, please.
We are less than 5 weeks away from an election that will determine the leadership of many elected positions across the country, from county commissioners to district attorneys to state house representatives to the US president. But our current president has suggested that he may refuse to accept the election results if he determines that there has been fraud, despite the fact that there's never really been any evidence of fraud that has had a material impact on any election to date. What are your thoughts about our president's comments? And do you think his unwillingness to accept results that may be unfavorable to him could result in violence or military action?
Well, first of all, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you so much for that question. Also, a shout out, of course, to President Lance Lucas, and also I'm honored to be on this distinguished panel. We find ourselves in a very critical time, and I would say, I would quote Maya Angelou, who said, when people show you who they are, believe them. We have every reason to believe that the president may not participate in the peaceful transfer of power. As you know, I'm from Florida. I know we all remember Gore versus Bush, and the courts ruled on that case before Congress had an opportunity to certify the election results. However, Vice President Gore obviously believed in the peaceful transfer of power and participated in that process. The most critical time that we would find ourselves in, should the president refuse to leave, would be from November 3rd to January 20th. The Constitution is a little unclear, unfortunately, about what can happen or can govern what would happen during that time. However, according to the 20th Amendment, on January 20th at noon, the sitting president is no longer president, which means he would lose all of his authority and power over the military and traditionally those institutions that would protect him. And so it would be shameful, Christine, if we had to utilize law enforcement or the military or other systems in order to remove this everyday citizen at that point. But believe me, we're fully prepared and ready to do just that. The best way to avoid this situation is to give Biden-Harris, and this is me talking, overwhelming, clear, and convincing win. So thank you for the question.
Yes, thank you, Congressman Demings. I'd like to go to you next, Dr. Eddie Glaude. With the militarization of our police force and the highest incarceration rates in of the world, right here in the United States, the over-policing of Black communities, the longer sentences for Black folks convicted of crimes, and less resources for Black folks who are accused of crimes, this state of our criminal justice system did not just happen overnight. Can you ground us in the history of policing in America and tell us how we got to this modern rallying cry to defund the police?
Well, I can't do that in a minute. But anyway, no, just kidding. Well, I want to thank President Lucas and all of the Spelman alumni who are here and who are enjoying, the conversation. I want to thank my fellow panelists. I'm looking forward to learning from you today. Just really quickly, one way to answer that question is just simply to cite a bibliography, right? To go to Elizabeth Hinton's wonderful book, From the War on Poverty to the War on Crime, The History of Mass Incarceration in the United States, or to go to Naomi Mirakawa's book, The First Civil Right, How Liberals Built Prison America. We can just list a series of books, whether Khalil Muhammad's book or Michelle Alexander's text in that regard. But let's talk about it within the recent history really quickly, right? You can go back to the Safe Streets Act of 1968. You can go back to the War on Crime in 1972 with 72 with Richard Nixon, and the draconian Rockefeller laws that had everything to do with responding to this movement of Black folk for full class citizenship in the country, right? So we have to understand that the call for law and order, that the idea of being strong on crime or tough on crime is actually bound up with a response to Black folk pushing for full citizenship rights in this country, right? Because in some ways, when we look at, say, the Kerner Commission report, which talked about two Americas, within that Kerner Commission report are various recommendations about policing our communities that have everything to do with containing and policing and surveilling Black communities in particular sorts of ways. So just early history, Safe Streets Act of 68, Richard Nixon's war on drugs in 71, think about the draconian Rockefeller laws. Reagan in the 1980s, the war on drugs accelerates the 1990s crime bill, 1994, but the 1033 program, which allows for surplus military grade weapons to be transferred to police forces or loaned to police forces around the country. There we begin to see the militarization of the police, although we saw it earlier, right? When you saw those tanks driving down Mississippi with guns and water hoses on Black folk in response to the Black freedom struggle. So what we have seen is a frame of policing in the country rooted around law and order, rooted around tough on crime that criminalizes Black bodies, which leads, I think, to the over surveillance of our communities. Our communities are over surveilled, over policed, and underprotected. And what the defund police movement is really about is just simply our budgets reflect our values. We shouldn't just simply invest in incarceration and surveillance. We should invest in our communities and invest in people. And we should understand that policing should be thought of within a broader conversation about a public infrastructure of care, which involves safety and security, not just simply law and order. And I was saying all of this with the former sheriff on the panel, so I'm just being careful here, you know.
Yes. Well, we're going to allow that former sheriff, Congressman Jennings, to talk about those thoughts that you brought up and those solutions that you brought up, and also give us a sense of what Congress is doing to address these issues, the systemic issues that have been going on for decades, if not centuries.
Well, thank you so much. And believe me, I share the doctor's sentiment that we need more than a minute. But of course, in Congress this year in June, we passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that will help to develop some guidelines that will help to govern the way police departments operate, whether they're a 10-person agency or a 36,000-person agency. Last Congress, under the leadership of Chairman Hakeem Jeffries, we passed the First Step Act, which was exactly that will deal with everything from sentencing reform to other issues, law enforcement and other issues. But it was just that, a first step. But let me go back to 1967, when President Johnson impaneled a commission to look at crime and policing in America. And of course, the commission concluded that we need to look at who we hire. We need to hire the brightest and the best, basically. We need to look at training, make sure they have the best equipment and are trained in how to use it. But, and this but is quite significant, we need to look at poverty. We need to look at unemployment. We need to look at substandard housing and wages and the other quality of life issues that affect communities in the first place. And we also need to think about it in this way. The police and the community are not two separate entities. The police is the community and the community is the police. They are one entity, and the only way we're going to solve our issues is to solve them by working together. So as we reform the police and the criminal justice system, and believe me, we do need to do that. We've got to address those social ills that cause decay in communities in the first place. In 2014, the 21st Century Task Force under President Obama also talked about reforming the police, but dealing with those social ills that cause decay. When the police are called, we cannot start at the end of the story, and that's the end of the story. We've got to deal with those issues that cause the police to be called in the first place. We can get this done, and we can meet this moment. I need more than a minute. I think I took more, but thank you so much.
Added the conversation just for comments like that, and it was well worth it. It was well worth it. So I'm going to move on to State Senator Nikema Williams, a good friend of mine. You were arrested, and I remember this keenly, that when you were arrested at the Georgia State Capitol, peacefully protesting. Can you share with us a little bit about that experience and share with us why these protests, though the peaceful protesters intend for it to be peaceful, why some folks end up causing damage and violence, and that becomes attributed to the protesters, even if they're not the ones instigating the violence?
So thank you, Christine. Thank you. I felt like I wanted to yield my time to the other panelists because I wanted to hear more about this conversation on policing. But thank you for having this conversation today. I'm glad to be here just to share in this experience and talk about our experience as Black people in this country and what we're facing right now. In 2018, Georgia was the poster child for what not to do in an election process. We know that we could have had Spelman's own Stacey Abrams as the first Black woman governor in this country, but we saw the rampant voter suppression tactics underway. I represent a district that is steeped in civil rights and activism. The Senate district that I represent was once held by Julian Bunn, who we all know his story of refusing, they refused him to be seated because of his protest of the Vietnam War. So I have an obligation and have always felt this way to make sure that I'm standing with my constituents and making sure that I elevate their voices when they want to be heard. And we were in special session, supposedly to discuss Hurricane Michael relief. And there were constituents of mine standing in the rotunda of the Capitol, chanting that every vote should be counted, demanding that every vote should be counted. And there is a police presence like we've never seen. They only come out, police, at the state Capitol when it's an issue that they feel like people that look like me or people that think like me are going to show up for. You don't see that on other people's advocacy days at the Capitol. But when it comes to voting rights, we have a heavy police presence at the Capitol. So I went and stood with my constituents thinking that I could help temper the situation and they could remain in the Capitol because we're in session. I'm a sitting state senator. I'm in the rotunda of the Capitol. And what the Capitol Police did was put me in handcuffs and took me to jail. And I spent hours in jail that evening waiting to get out. And what that showed me was it does not matter how peaceful our protests are. It doesn't matter how you choose to elevate your voice. If you're talking about an issue or if you're raising your concerns about an issue that people in leadership don't want to hear, they will try and find a way to silence you. My charges were eventually dropped, but the solicitor who dropped my charges on the paperwork wrote that my charges were dropped because he was gonna let my arrest be punishment enough for the crime that I committed. Well, I didn't commit a crime. First of all, everybody that was arrested that day should not have been arrested, but the Georgia Constitution gives specific protections for sitting state senators during the legislative session. So just last week, I filed a federal lawsuit against the Capitol Police. So not because I want money or anything, but I want this unjust law overturned so that people don't feel like they can't express themselves. In a safe space in the state Capitol, we all have a right to free speech. We have more than just the Second Amendment in this country. And this lawsuit that I've just filed in federal court hopefully will overturn this unjust law.
This is an amazing panel. I just say my heart is pounding so hard. Thank you so much, State Senator Williams. We appreciate your comments. I'm going to turn this back to Congresswoman Demings really quickly to reflect on the violence that are perpetuated by instigators at peaceful protests when folks are trying to protest for Black lives. And these folks who are self-proclaimed white supremacists in Charlottesville, we saw them in Parkland, we saw them in Pittsburgh, we saw them at El Paso, we saw it at Kenosha, where there is just violence from folks who are not there to protest. And in this climate where our president seems to encourage this behavior, for example, the shout out that he gave to the white supremacist group Proud Boys during the debate last week, we find ourselves in a particularly precarious situation. What can law enforcement and or Congress do to prevent such violence from these self-proclaimed white supremacists?
Well, thank you so much. And I so enjoyed listening to the state senator tell her story. I hope to have the opportunity to listen to her a lot more in about 30 days or so. To her and Ms. Wallace, we wish you the very, very best. But let me say this, as someone with a 27-year law enforcement background, I've worked protests of all kinds through my years. And what I do know is that there will always be people who will try to hijack what is currently going on for their own agenda that has absolutely nothing to do with the justice or equality. But the state senator said something that I want to just highlight. She said, people in leadership don't want to hear. They don't want to hear what the protesters are saying. So it goes back to who we elect in positions in the first place, right? The police on their own seldom respond to in situations like this unless those in leadership who they work for say, we want you over there and we want you to take care of that problem, and we don't care who gets caught up in it. And so who we elect, who we put in power matters. And especially over the next 30 days, you know, in Congress, our job is to continue to pass legislation, anti-hate laws. You know, we saw a vote on the House floor recently, an anti-lynching law that all of the members of Congress could not bring themselves to vote for. But we must continue to be a powerful voice and pass legislation that allows people to continue to peacefully protest. Protesting is a part of the moral fabric in this country. It always has been. But for all of us, whether we're protesting or whether we're there protecting the protesters, we must denounce violence of any kind, any place, perpetrated by anyone, whether that's people who look like us that try to hijack the peaceful demonstrations and protests, or whether that's the Proud Boys and others that the president has told to stand by. We cannot ever send a message that we tolerate at any place by anyone at any time. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Glad. So to this issue of racial representation in Congress and in other leadership positions, racial identity in the history of America, our current president has banned this process of racial sensitivity trainings in our federal agencies.
Mm.
And though, you know, these things can vary in content, generally they include some context about race in America, the history, race as a social construct. But can you briefly give our audience a little bit more insight into what a racial sensitivity training is and the impact of removing these trainings from the federal spaces and places in Washington, D.C. and across our nation?
Well, you know, I mean, we can think about it in a number of different ways, but, you know, training in terms of unconscious bias, training in terms of evaluation of talent, training, I mean, it cuts across the board of how race enters at every level of hiring, at every level of evaluation, at every level of assessment, and how we can then understand the ways in which we can unconsciously employ and deploy racial prejudices and intent, right, in our evaluation and assessment of folk, which then, shall we say, extends the way in which racial inequality evidences itself across a variety of institutions. But let's be clear, two really quick points. One, we see the limits of racial representational politics already. We got Cameron in Kentucky, and we got Barrett being nominated by President Trump. The fact that Cameron is Black and the fact that she's a woman doesn't guarantee anything in both cases. So we need to understand that it's not just simply representation, it's the substance of one's political position. That's the first thing we need to do. The first thing I need to do. The second point really quickly is this, is that banning racial bias training by the OMB and others, declaring racial bias training or 1619 as un-American is all evidence of a panic at its root. That there is a sense in this moment where the country is trying to imagine itself differently, where we're confronting in some ways a racial reckoning, there's a reassertion of the lie. These folk want to hold on to the belief that America is a white nation in the vein of old Europe. And so there's an assertion of a particular story that affirms this idea that you and I are interlopers, that you and I are the receivers of charity, of philanthropic gestures, that we're not central to the actual fabric of the country. And so what we're hearing from Donald Trump and his ilk is that to even be aware of our racial past, to be aware of our wrongdoing is somehow un-American. It's because we're calling people like him and the Proud Boys and Mitch McConnell and Mark Meadows and McCarthy, all of these cats, we're calling them to the carpet because they believe in America. They believe in an America that is dying on the vine. We're hearing its death rattle right now. And so we need to understand what this call to ban racial bias training, what it really is. It's just one indication of panic at its root.
Yes. So I want to bring in Cynthia Wallace here because you have experience in corporate America at these Fortune 500 corporations. And there are serious diversity, inclusion, and equity issues at that level as well. Can you tell us what you think we need to be focused on in order to push corporations to also include us in the job opportunities and advancement opportunities, and including us in the decisions that are made on another side of our society, the economic side of our society?
Thanks, Christine, and thank you, President Lucas, for having me here. I am excited not to be only running to become the first Spelman woman elected to the U.S. Congress, but I would also be the first African American to represent the district that I'm running for. In the history of this district. And so I'm also just honored to be a part of this wonderful panel. And, I've spent a lot of my professional career focused on diversity. Diversity is not simply about having different races and genders in the room. It's about the impact that comes from having those different voices in the room that have lived different lives and what that's going to bring to the decision-making process. When the voices of any group is muted, the solutions that are derived won't have that full perspective of those being impacted by those decisions. And so one of the things I'm excited about being a part of this race is having my voice heard, having my voice be a part of the conversation. And we also, after we saw the murder of, George Floyd, a lot of corporations, I think, finally woke up and recognized that we have a diversity issue, something that obviously we've been talking about. And so we have seen at least some movement in some of these companies because they're having conversations that they never had. I've been at my corporation for about 20 years. And the kind of conversations we had about African Americans from June to now has been unprecedented in those 20 years. And so I think what we have to do, though, is to continue to put pressure on these organizations and not to just have numbers for quotas, but to have numbers that mean something to the decisions. And one of the things we see, the C-suite is still not diverse enough. And so we've got to continue to push our corporations to make sure that we are represented at all levels of the organizations. And so I definitely look forward to doing that in Congress and increasing that 4% number of Black women who are represented in Congress, and make it one or two more, or lots more, because I know we're going to have Nakima there, as well as myself and this historic class of women we have running for Congress this year.
Thank you. Congresswoman Val Demings, do you have just one more second for us to ask a quick question, or do you have to leave? Should we say goodbye?
I think she just left.
Oh, she just left.
Yeah,
Okay.
said leave.
I'm so sorry about that. That's okay. That's okay. We're going to start to begin to have a little bit of a conversation about what we can do to really ensure that we have that amazing class of women in just a moment. So I'm going to move back to you, State Senator Williams. You are on the ballot this November for Congress to carry on the legacy of the late Congressman John Lewis. You are a fellow HBCU alum hailing from Talladega College in Alabama. Can you share with us your thoughts on funding HBCUs and what type of legislation you have initiated and supported, and what type of legislation you would support in Congress that would help give our institutions the investment that they need, particularly considering the unequal investment that we have had in education in Black communities across the country for centuries now?
So this is a topic that I can talk about for days, Christine, because both of my parents attended Talladega College, my grandparents attended Talladega College, so HBCUs anytime that I can do something to uplift my school or any HBCU, I'm all for it. As a freshman legislator, I came into the Senate bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, thinking that I could change the world. I still have that optimism, but I wrote legislation for an HBCU study committee because Georgia is rich in HBCUs, and we have so much opportunity here, but the state of Georgia is not supporting our HBCUs. Even the public HBCUs don't get the same resources as the majority public institutions in the state. So I had a study committee on how the state of Georgia could invest more in our HBCUs and have a pipeline for leadership from students graduating from HBCUs. we went through every HBCU president came in and submitted information, and we had meetings across the state. And when we presented the information and the findings back to the Senate, I think that they allowed me to chair this committee and allowed my legislation to go through as a freshman member of the legislature, thinking that it was the way that you could mold me and have me move in a direction that they wanted me to take the committee in. But they didn't quite like where I went with the study committee. And so out of all of the things that university presidents asked for here in the state of Georgia, none of the recommendations were taken up, because there was some idea and talk about merging institutions, not giving institutions the resource. Exactly. See the look on your face? Not giving institutions the resources that they need to continue to uplift Black voices and Black brain power in this country. But the state of Georgia, another piece was introduced afterwards saying that we should merge institutions in the state, and that would help us grow our schools. But I look back to, as a Talladega College alum, and I look back to the inaugural parade with President Trump, and my school, Talladega College, was the only HBCU band to march in that parade that day. And our president decided to make that decision based on funding, because he felt like that was the way to get in good with the administration to bring in funding. Now, I've written a long letter to the Board of Trustees and to the president, so he knows exactly how I feel about this. But this was all about funding. We shouldn't have to parade ourselves down Pennsylvania Avenue and do a dog and pony show to get funding for our institutions. But that's what happened. And so we continue to see ourselves. And I remember when the CBC having meetings and President Trump wanting to host meetings with HBCU presidents, but it was photo ops. And so what really came of that? The Congressional Black Caucus has plans in place that they've submitted to this president, to this administration, to increase funding, not just for particular schools, but programs. I'm a product of TRIO programs. I'm a product of the Upward Bound program, Talent Search program, and I'm a Ronald McNair alum scholar. And these are programs that receive federal funding, but have not seen the increases to keep up with the number of students that need their resources, especially when we're in the midst of a global pandemic and so many people are hurting. So we have to look at how we not only increase the funding for our institutions, but these programs that are so critical for low-income students that are at our HBCUs and need this federal funding, which just isn't there right now.
Yeah, and it's really important to say that our HBCUs contribute so much to our economic system, and they contribute so much to the value of and the quality of professionals that we have in this country. We would not have as many doctors, as many dentists, as many Black attorneys and Black professionals.
Women.
HBCUs. So this is an important conversation. I know I'm preaching to the choir. But it's just important to note that this is not an ask for a handout. This is what we deserve. Dr. Glaude, so to that point of getting what we deserve, support of historically Black universities could be seen as a form of reparations. And there are many conversations about how to institute reparations through support of Black institutions. What other policies do you think Congress could come up with to help mitigate the effects of systemic racism that has plagued us for centuries now?
I wish I knew, to be honest with you. But I don't want to presume that I know everything. That's the first thing I want to say out loud. But Derek Hamilton, the economist at CUNY, no, I think he's at the New School now. The New School for Research has talked about baby bonds and how that would impact the life chances of African American children. We know that investment in early childhood, in early child care and learning would have a tremendous effect. We know that no matter what we do right now, we cannot close the education gap and the wealth gap if we continue to do it as we're doing it right now. It's going to require directed policy, just like intentional policy produced the differentials between Black folk and the rest of the country. It's going to be intentional policy that actually closes the gap. So I think we need to do it around early childhood education. I definitely think we need to invest in terms of healthcare. I think we also need to invest in terms of housing. The dual housing market has had a clear impact on our ability to accrue wealth. It's not the fact that Black folk can't save. It has everything to do with intentional policy that locked us out of the growth of the vaunted middle class. There has to be intentional policy in order to redress that issue. This is particularly the case given what happened in the Great Recession, not the current depression, but the Great Recession, when African Americans lost their homes at alarming rates. We haven't seen that kind of loss of wealth in the Black community since the collapse of the Freedmen's Bank. We lost the entire decade of the 90s in terms of gains. So it seems to me that it has to be direct policy. Again, baby bonds, early childhood education, perhaps having everything to do with healthcare, and of course, housing, it seems to me.
Yeah, I love that. I've heard of some of those promoted, and I think that we all could, use a little more of a deeper conversation with some of those folks and study what has been written about reparations so that we can communicate that to the folks we do end up voting in to office. I'm going to go with you, Ms. Wallace, and ask you a question about how we focus on getting the vote out. Now, the US has a relatively low rate of voter participation compared to other developed democracies. What do you think really is the cause of this disengagement and lack of participation in the political process for so many Americans, Black and white? And do you have any radical ideas about how we address this issue, and so we can get folks engaged and have, we're about a 60% rate of voter participation now at our best, get us up to like 80%, 90% voter participation rate?
Thank you for that question. I am the proud daughter of a father who was a civil rights activist. He actually co-founded the NAACP in 1968 in our small town, and he fought for voting rights. He fought for desegregation of schools. And voter suppression is at an all-time high in this country. I mean, it's just a reality, with closing early voting sites, limiting participation in that way, with the hurdles that they've been putting up across in the middle of a pandemic in absentee ballots, or even the misinformation about the absentee ballot process. And so we've got to make voting easier for people and not put these hurdles. I'm running in the 9th Congressional District. This district was the site of the worst and most egregious example of absentee ballot fraud in the history of this country, or in decades. When they stole the absentee ballots, literally went door to door and stole them from poor minority folks in a small town in North Carolina in the 2018 election. And so when we talk about absentee ballot fraud and when there's misinformation about it, the only example of it that I know about happened in 2018, and it was committed by Republicans. So we've got to clean up our process. We've also, when we think about radical ideas, and I know many corporations, when we talked about corporations earlier, some corporations now are actually making election day a day off for their employees. So what we need to do as a nation is make that a holiday. My mother made her career in factories, and she worked in a time when that kind of job was plentiful, and it helped me go to Spelman College. But folks like her and people doing those kind of jobs need more flexibility to be able to exercise their right. And then finally, just yesterday, I was in one of the small counties in this 8-county district, which is gerrymandered, in Robinson County. And I met 2 young men who were 18, and they're about to vote for the first time. And we also have to make sure we are reaching our youth, and we're making sure that they have people to vote for and issues, and we're listening to them as well. And if they feel heard and they feel that there are people on that ballot that are going to take their interests and concerns to their day job, they'll go out and vote as well.
Ms. Wallace, you are reading my mind. So I will just reiterate, if there are lots of Spelman alum who have power in corporations and they can push to have a day off for voting. There are other things that we can push for in our communities to make sure that folks can get to the polls, things as simple as voting early, number one, but also so that you're available to help on election day. But also the folks that care for your family, that care for maybe your home, or that work in your office? Can you volunteer to help them with childcare on election day? Can you volunteer, of course, to give folks a ride to the polls? Can you volunteer to make sure that that elderly folks in your community have done everything that they need to do to get their ballots out in the mail or to the ballot box? That folks that you know where to deposit their ballots. So little things like that. I don't believe that we have a whole lot of non-voters on the call today, but to the extent that we do, you know what you need to do. But the many of us have already voted via mail-in ballots, and so one of the things that you can do is really reach out to not just the folks who are close to you, but those folks who are that you do not have such an intimate relationship with, that you're maybe 3 or 4 degrees removed from. Reach out to those folks, because it is those folks that will are less likely to vote. So I'm going to take this question to you, and to the point that Ms. Wallace was making, Senator Williams. Generation Z and millennials are essentially the folks under the age of 40. Now, I don't know if you make that, I don't make that, I missed that. But they will account for 37% of eligible voters this election. And I, want to really demystify this idea that young folks don't vote. They do vote. They don't vote at the same rates as older folks. But these Generation Z folks and these millennials are voting at higher rates than we did at their age, according to 2018 election and the primary. They're coming out to vote, but still we need more of them to vote, of course. So what do you think we should be doing to encourage millennials and Generation Zers, who my daughter is a Generation Z, will vote for the president for the first time in a presidential election, 18 years old. She's a Spelman freshman. What do we need to do to get those young people out to vote, besides pull them by the ear and make sure they do it, which is what I do?
Well, I know you don't have to pull Karma because she's been volunteering on campaigns forever. So she is special. But think about, everything that we do becomes a habit. And if you have never voted before, then you've never learned that habit of voting. I have a 5-year-old son, my Carter Cakes, and just last week we went to vote in the special election, and he woke up. We had talked about voting the night before because we always make a plan to go and vote. And he woke up that morning and we were running late, and I'm like, okay, you have to go on to school, and school in the other room because it's virtual. But he was like, Mommy, but are we not going to vote? And he was upset that he was not going to get to go and vote with me. So we have to make voting a habit, first of all, with our children, because if you train them up in that way, then they will stay the course. But also, just listening to so many people that I talk to, we can't make it about partisan politics. And I say that as the chair of the Democratic Party of Georgia. So I am very much a partisan person. I'm the first Black woman to chair our state party, but for far too long, they haven't seen people that, number one, look like them or care what they thought who were in these positions of power. So making sure that we take some of the partisanship out of it and make it about the issues that matter to them every day. So when I go and talk to people at schools, when I talk to young people, I talk about issues that are relatable. I talk about so many, like student loan debt. I just filled out my personal financial disclosure for Congress, and I was like, wow, my husband, who decided to go and get this PhD at Clark Atlanta, I'm like, boy, you owe how much in student loans? So I am still talking about issues that matter to people wakes you up and makes you understand that you might not be a part of this process, but somebody is deciding this for you and you deserve to be heard. And so it has been really impactful just listening to what matters to people and connecting that to the people that are decision makers and centering their issues and their policies.
And Chrissy, if I could jump in real briefly, I think Senator Williams, you bring up a great point about even representation that reflects them. I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I had to get loans when I was at Spelman, but I also always say I went to college at a time that, the cost of a college loan wasn't the size of a mortgage, which is the reality of many folks in my own family, and many of my friends. And so, but when our voices, back to that question about diversity, having those voices of real people who had college loans, real people who, have had issues. I had a time where I had a period of time I didn't have insurance, and I was switching jobs. So having people that have those real lived experiences and having their voices at the table makes a difference. And then talking to those young people about your struggles and saying, I know your issues and concerns because I've lived them, and I plan to go there and fight for you. I think will totally make a difference, and hopefully will encourage more of them to get out to vote.
That's so true. Thank you, Ms. Wallace. So I have a question. It's a similar question to what we've been talking about the past few minutes, but this is for Dr. Glaude. Can we talk about Black men really?
Let me pull up a little closer for this conversation.
Because, I will say, now I will also demystify this idea that Black men don't show up to vote. They vote about 10 percentage points less than Black women. Black women vote at 64%, Black men vote around 54%. And that is nothing to sneeze at. Let me just say that. But we need everybody. And, I have had some really interesting conversations, even just knocking doors with Black men about why they don't participate in the process. And I was just wondering, maybe Dr. Glaude, you can give us a little bit of insight, and also as Black women, give us some thoughts on how we can encourage them to vote, and maybe if anything that we are doing that is keeping them, from wanting to vote. Give us some insight if you have any. Dr. Glaude, you're on mute. I know you in it. Can't hear you. See, that is Russia.
Because this was a question, I was waiting to hear the answer to this as well. I'm like, I started.
Lord, I am so sorry. Try one more time.
Now, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Jesus.
I don't know what's going on. So I don't want to presume that I know. My computer's just going crazy right now. This is Russia. I'm about to start hearing music. What the? Can you hear that? That's fascinating. Are y'all hearing music?
No.
Okay, good. So I don't know what's driving it, right? I mean, we could talk about that figure being Black male eligible voters, because we know that Black men are disappearing as a result of the carceral state, the very first question you just asked me. We also need to just take an honest assessment, or make an honest judgment, that oftentimes when people are not voting, they're making a substantive judgment about the system itself, that it's not apathy. It's about the system not delivering anything for me and my own. And so there's nothing to be invested in this regard. So I think we need to look at those numbers. Are they voting at the national level? Are they voting at the local level? Is there any substantive difference? Because then maybe we can parse it. I don't know. But I do know this, is that Black men have to be more engaged in this process. And then we have to begin to interrogate why 10% of them voted for Trump, why we're hearing murmurings among that same constituency with regards to Trump in this moment. Obviously, I'm avoiding the question because I can't answer it in any substantive way. But I do want to say that what we're witnessing here is a substantive judgment on the part of this demographic that the political system has not delivered for them, that the political system has instead targeted them and as simply people to lock up and to disappear. And I think that experience has led to a certain orientation to the body politic, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. That absolutely makes sense. And I will say that the research that I have been privy to says that, and we are now up to 18% of Black men who say they will vote for Trump. So we can interrogate that as well. There is definitely
sexism.
Well, okay, say more about that quickly.
No, I'm just saying, I mean, look, the thing that we need to understand is that we already know that a certain percentage of Black folk are conservative.
Mm.
right? Just because you're Black doesn't mean that we all have progressive politics. We need to be very clear about that.
Right.
So, and when you bracket the issue of race, the social science data shows that when you bracket the issue of race, our community is as conservative as Mormons, right? When you really look at it in terms of its detail, right? So there's conservatism that's rampant in our community, particularly around values questions. And then we just need to be very specific. Certain sexism and patriarchy continues to be rampant in our community as well. And what we see is Donald Trump appealing to some kind of toxic masculinity as a ground for a certain kind of politics. And Black men aren't exempt from that. Even when Donald Trump is explicitly racist, he's still appealing to some notion of manhood that has some currency, even among Black male voters.
And I will just jump in. I know when we look at the 2016 election, when Hillary Clinton didn't become president, because we don't really know fully all the information, but I think as much a part of her loss was sexism. I'm from a small town in Georgia, and there are churches in my community growing up that still didn't allow women to preach in the pulpit. And so that kind of mindset pervades people, no matter, beyond that Sunday morning service. And when I was thinking also about the fact that, in small communities, there's still most of the businesses, the business owners, the leaders are men. And it's such a patriarchal society, not only in the South, that would pervade any other part of the country that's a more small place. If you live in a city, you've had women as managers. You've had them be your bosses. But if you're in a smaller community, that may be something that you haven't experienced. And so it is something that may give you pause when you're trying to vote for someone that is a woman, whether you're a woman or a man in many situations. And so we've got a lot of work to do to break down those barriers.
So very quickly, we have one last question, actually two, and they're kind of related. One is, what do we need to do in the next 30 days? And the second one is, how can we better hold our representatives accountable, folks accountable? I think that the answers are one and the same. But does anyone have any insight? I'm going to go to you, Senator Nikema Williams, since you are the least recent person to speak. Any ideas of just what we need to do, knowing what you know about Spelman alum? What can we do in the next 30 days?
Over the next 30 days, we have to remain vigilant. We have to understand that November 3rd is not just the election day. We're in an election season right now. So we need to be encouraging people to vote now, vote by mail, which is the same thing as absentee voting. Don't let people tell you that it's something different. So make sure that you're getting information out to your communities, getting information out to people that you serve in your various organizations so that they understand the process of getting their ballots turned back in. Voting is going to be critical. We have to leave no doubt. We can't win by a small margin so that there is this claim on election night that there's a different victor before all of the absentee ballots are counted, because we're seeing it teed up just that way. And we know that, as Congresswoman Deming said earlier, that we want to see a peaceful transfer of power, but there are people here right now who are already preparing us that this is not going to be what happens after November 3rd. So we also need to have our people prepared to not expect election results on election night. So I would rather have accuracy than expediency. And if it takes a little longer to get the votes counted, because I know myself, I have lawsuits that have gone through where we're getting votes counted, where you can turn your absentee ballot in as long as it's postmarked by election day. And so there will be an additional 3 days for it to be turned in. So there's no way that every vote will be counted by November 3rd. So we need to prepare our people so that we set realistic expectations over the next 30 days while getting them out to the polls.
Right. And it is a part of, what we have become accustomed to for the media to tell us who, based on the statistics, their statistical analysis of the percentage of votes counted, who the winner will be. But that is never the exact count. And we should expect that there will be many ballots to count after election night, and that any claim by the media is just that, a claim.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
We need to wait until every single vote is counted. This has been an incredible conversation. I am so grateful to all of our guests. Congresswoman Val Demings, who had to leave us, Senator Nikema Williams, Dr. Glaude, and Ms. Wallace, who all joined us today. And I'm really appreciative for all of the insight and boldness with which you came to this conversation. I'm going to leave it to our NAASC Atlanta chapter president, Ms. Adrienne Lance Lucas, to give us our final words. And with that, I will say goodbye. I am Christine White. I hope to see you all at the polls.
Thank you, Christine. And thank you to all of our panelists. This was absolutely fantastic. On behalf of the National Alumni Association of Spelman College, if you are an alum, we ask you to join us beyond those gates of Spelman, where we celebrate spiritually, socially, intellectually, with a sense of purpose, all powered by sisterhood. So if you have not joined, please visit atlantanaasc.org. A couple of words to also mention, for those who registered early, we have a special treat. The law firm of Nelson Mullins will be supporting us with signed copies of Dr. Glaude's book, Begin Again, James Baldwin's America, and its urgent lessons for today. So please, if you receive an email after this session, you have been selected to receive those signed copies. And we want to thank that law firm of Nelson Mullins. We also want to thank our chairs for the Advocacy and Social Action Committee, Anita Wallace-Thomas and Kayla Thigpen, for all the work that you have done in helping us to pull this together. And our own Dorothy Grayson for helping bring Senator Booker's words to fruition for this particular event. So that's all that we have for today. Again, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and God bless.
Everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Bob.
To everything, turn, turn, turn.
Thank you all.
There is a
Thanks,
season, turn, 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 and a time to every purpose under heaven. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, 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 and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh, a time to weep. Yeah, yeah, yeah. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, 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 and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to build up, a time to tear down, a time to dance, a time to move on. time for peace, a time to sow, a time to rise.